everyone to join this episode of the Video Wars podcast. And today we are to meet one of my old ex-colleagues back in Google, and Balu, who is the head of media algorithms behind YouTube. And I don't have to talk more because YouTube, everybody should know that the largest user-generated content, UGC content platform, holding platform. And then today we are going to talk about something definitely related to YouTube and UGC, video technologies and media technologies at large. And at the very beginning, I would like Balu to introduce himself. Hi, Balu. It's great to have you down here.
Hi, Zoe. Thanks so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. Like you said, I lead the media algorithms team at YouTube. What we are in charge of is all of transcoding for all the videos that get uploaded onto YouTube. We really unpackage them, process them, and repackage them into formats that are played back on different devices like TVs and laptops and mobile phones and whatnot, right? So in addition to that, we are also in charge of improving our pipelines and keeping them up with the latest technologies. So we do quite a bit of research behind the scenes on all the advanced technologies and formats, both on the audio side as well as on the video side. Right? And like you said before, we've worked very well in the past, and it's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, great to have you down here. Let me also introduce, because I'm the host. This is Zoe, and I also have my co-host, Thomas, to join with me. And Thomas, you want to have a brief intro about yourself, and then you can go ahead to talk anything with Balu on your side.
Hi, I'm Thomas Davis. I work on video codecs for Vision ULA, and I've been working on video standards like AV1 and HEVC in the past. One thing that really interests me about what you do is just the enormous scale. Can you give some idea of just how much video you're handling?
Thanks, Thomas. It's we see at YouTube quite a bit of video, and that's an understatement. What we generally have is about 550 hours of video uploaded every minute, and we process all of that in the background, right? We have about 2 billion plus daily users, and the playtime for video is about 4 billion hours per day or something like that, right? For video from
YouTube. I just know of billions.
Yeah. It's one of those things which is if you consider it against the population of the world, which is 8 billion or so, it is pretty decent proportion. So we do see a lot of video. We do see a lot of churn, and our processing systems are massive to keep up with that scale, right? Both on the software side as well as on the hardware side. So.
Right. I think this is one thing because you also mentioned previously, this is YouTube. So right now YouTube hosting all kinds of different videos. And we believe there's a large amount of user-generated content from individual contributors. As you also mentioned that every single minute, there's more than 500 hours of videos being uploaded to this platform. And we found sometimes let's back to some technologies because user-generated content has a big variety in terms of its qualities, right?
Yes.
And then I think you are mentioning that you are leading the team doing all this backend transcoding with other processing before the videos are being largely shared with the community. So we like to learn what's so special about the user-generated content, UGC, in terms of when you process it? Of course, there's a scale part, but then let's focus more on the UGC uniqueness.
Yeah, absolutely. So UGC, user-generated content, it's substantially different than curated content, which is professional video. Most of broadcast, most of TVs and Hollywood, post-production houses end up doing a lot of you know editing and processing on videos to curate it to like the right kind of the look and feel and the narrative, right, like to match the narration there. With UGC, all of that is less of an issue. I think most of the content creators are like you and I, who are like not working in production houses, right? We want to record some videos of like what is more emotionally attached to us, right? Like, so we want to take videos of our kids, of our pets, of like things that happen when you go out and have a nice day outside, right? So like there is no like, hey, here's a story that I want users to be engaged in, kind of a thing. But it's mostly about like sharing, like giving everybody a voice and sharing that voice with like whoever you want to share. And if it just happens to be the rest of the world, that is the platform. It ends up like YouTube becomes that platform for you, right? And so a lot of times we get like videos that are like not as high in quality, not as well curated. A lot of like saturation issues occur, a lot of like compression issues occur because folks don't know how to compress before uploading it. A lot of like pre-compression, a lot of editing issues also occur because they want to ensure that there is some sort of look and feel to it. They try, and in the process of that trying, end up creating artifacts that are unintentionally so incorporated into the user-generated contents. So when the video gets uploaded and when we see the video, it's already artifact written. And so when we look at the video, you're looking at something that is problematic, something that is like, not the best quality that you want. And so when you want to transcode them, it becomes so much more harder because your original is already artifact written, right? And it becomes harder in two different ways. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, I was. No, so I was really going to say, what does quality even mean in this kind of situation where you're trying to guess what the intent of the uploader is in some sense? If you're trying to improve the video, you could, in a production environment, when you're compressing, you're trying to minimize the damage. But in this case, you're trying to enhance the original as well.
Not entirely, although there's a good part of it that I think you have it right. Quality and its understanding becomes extremely tricky, right? Most of the quality metrics that exist, well, to give you just a very high-level summary, video quality in general has been a field for a long time, right? Like, and there's been people working on video quality and making it right from the 60s, 50s and 60s. But there's two different fields of video quality. One is the subjective metrics, and the other one is the objective metrics. Subjective metrics are essentially like, asking a bunch of people and collecting scores on like how good the video quality is. And almost always this is against a reference, right? So you have an original, you process that original, you come up with an outcome of it, and you say, okay, let's compare these two. And how good do you think the quality is if the original is 5, let's say, 1 to 5, the typical Likert scale. And most people give a rating, and the intent is like, people are generally, like herds of people are generally very accurate in telling what a good quality is. But UGC, that falls apart, right? You ask 10 different people about like a artifact written quality without showing the original, they give you 10 different ratings. So it becomes extremely tricky in understanding and quality of what that is. The other component of this, the objective metrics, have been also developed in the perspective of a reference. Like how far away from my reference am I? PSNR, MSE, SSIM, VMAF, all of these are reference-based metrics, which means to say that like you actively look at how different you are from what you think is an ideal image or an ideal video, right? Even then, this sort of like UGC framework breaks down because your original itself is pretty bad. And so when you're trying to compress that bad quality original and you're trying to make sure that your PSNR is high, which means that these are pixel-based metrics, right? So if you look at MSE and pixel to pixel and trying to get back to that faulty original and spending more bits to do that, you're ending up compressing it not so efficiently, because you're giving it more bits to introduce the artifacts that were there in the original. And so having a good quality metric here is not only like a nice to have, but like essential, right? So to understand what a good compression level is, how much can we compress before we call it done, right? It's good enough quality. And so how do we define that? How do we understand that? Sorry, Zoe,
So
you were saying?
you mentioned that before the video is fed into the transcoder, and you mentioned that better we may have idea about the quality of the input videos, right? So you basically also like justify that there's a lot of video metrics that are being collected with a reference. And then when the UGC video, they upload it to your backend, and they're just there by themselves. And we believe, I think this is falling into so-called no reference quality metrics that you want to get some idea before basically to try to transcode to the best way.
Correct. Yes, and no reference metrics are really essential here because they work well without like what a good original is. But internally, they also have like some correlation with like the subjective metrics. The theory behind it is going back to like 1980s or early 90s, where subjective opinion scores that are collected across large swath of people, either professionals or novices, is like a good understanding of the quality of the video, right? And so when you have an understanding from like an early 90s and late 80s technology that says, subjective experiments when done in a particular way through an ITU standard are giving you like accurate enough information, right? With X number of subjects always looking at this video and always following a particular scale in a particular viewing conditions and all of that, then the scores collected through that with the average of those scores, like what is called the mean opinion scores, then forms your your benchmark. That's your your golden reference, so to speak. And so even with no reference metrics, the intent is to have a very good correlation to the subjective scores, so that it tells you how good your no reference metric is. And so we have like teams like live at UT Austin building a few different no reference metrics that are always rooted in this subjective experiments and MOS correlations, right? And so there's a bunch of Albovic's team, yes. Professor Bovic has been in this field for a very long time, right? He wrote practically wrote the handbook on video quality, right? So so his teams are doing some amazing work on like how we can build no reference metrics, how we can build reference-based, more perceptually aligned metrics outside of the pixel-based metrics, right? And so that becomes now suddenly handy, and the usage of it is twofold, right? One, like you said, for every video that gets uploaded, we can run a no reference metric and figure out like where in this quality spectrum this video falls into. But then there is also like the secondary use of it, where you probably also don't need that at the entry point, but after you transcode, you could just run a no reference metric and say, is this good enough? Is this where we want to be, right? Now, both Professor Bovic and us and a bunch of people, including like Facebook and Twitter and teams in Bristol and teams in Nantes, who have been working on subjective quality and objective correlations, have faced this problem with UGC, is that the correlations that you get with this understanding that large amount of people will give you like a good rating on a video that are closely aligned, that also breaks down. So with UGC, what happens is we found that people are, since narrative is not the primary intent here, and since like the video is not curated, people rate the video based on how much they like the content on it. And they also rate it differently if they're emotionally attached to that content. Like if I saw a dog video, I'm likely to rate it more because of a bias that I like dogs or something like that, right? Versus a cat video, for example, or vice versa, right? There's also the likingness of the content, right? Like, so if I'm a big gamer, I might rate a gaming video higher than a non-gaming video, for example, right? So subjective MOS scores are also a little bit tricky to get it right. And so there is this new concept of, can we open that up? Can we not fully prescribe to the ITU model, but can we go full crowdsourcing on quality scores? Enable viewers to look at the video the way they consume it in mobile phones, in different environments. You don't need a fixed distance between the video that you're watching versus your eyes, right? So that distance breaks down when you're having a mobile phone, for example. It really like not conforms to the ITU standards that were defined for subjective quality before, and it collects a lot more data because it's crowdsourced, right? And so there is this new wave of like crowdsource-based subjective testing to get these mean opinion scores, which is a little bit noisier, but is found to be more better representation of like what UGC users might feel like, right?
So in this analysis phase, when video is uploaded, you can run these metrics and you get some kind of score out, but is there more to it than just good versus bad, or can you get qualitative information about what is wrong with this video and how you might fix it, or how you might not make it worse in some particular aspect?
That's a great question, Thomas. I think more and more that sort of philosophy is being looked at with machine learning models and with like deep nets coming into play. This has become more of a thing where a lot of like content attributes are driven into the network layers. VMAF is a good example. UVQ, which our team developed at YouTube, is another good example, where it's not just about the score anymore. It's also about like the attributes, like what the video went through, right? So the UGC quality metrics, for example, UVQ goes into 3 different nets. One is the content net, which understands the content philosophy a little bit better. Is it easy to compress? Is it difficult to compress? Does it have a lot of moving things associated with it? A gaming video, for example, has the player movements, but also like score and map and other critical information in the corners with like text floating around. So all of these contents are being absorbed. Like there is a net to train on just that content itself. Similarly with animation, similarly with sports, similarly with other like film content and so on. There is a secondary net called the distortion net, which really focuses on the distortions that happen like after the video is recorded, right? So these are user-introduced distortions through processing, through pre-processing, or through effects creation pipelines, where like they want cinematic blur, for example, or they want to introduce like film grain, for example, right? So those sort of things will introduce certain amount of artifacts during processing. And then the third net is the compression net, which is really not just a bunch of artifacts that are block based, but also correlation and interdependency between these artifacts, between blockiness, ringing, noise, whatnot, right? So these 3 different nets are indicative of like how much of what has happened to the video, gives us some amount of data provenance there as to like what the video went through before it gets uploaded to us, right? And so the part that, like I said, you mostly got it right is this aspect of it. The part that going back to a couple of questions back, the part that like I think we don't generally do is heavily pre-process that video before we transcode it. And the reason for that is creator intent. So we want to keep the intent of the creator as much as we can. Now, even with YouTube, a lot of like early YouTube videos suggested that like, people are educating themselves on how to do YouTube videos better, right? They had a decade or so where like people were really investing in high-end cameras, high-end like lighting and microphones, and to create better quality content than like just recording it with your cell phone, for example. And so when they invest in this, when they understand this, when they educate themselves of how to make a good video, they become much better at it, and they give us videos that are much better in quality. So the upload content becomes so much nicer to look at. And so in those cases, we generally rely on creator intent being the primary consideration. Even if we get a bad quality video, we quote unquote assume that it is intentionally driven by the creator to be that way. When somebody spent money buying apps and buying software to create a particular look that they want, and we go in and remove that, considering that as an artifact, that's not the best thing for the creator there, right? So we generally try to keep the creator intent. Now, in the last couple of years or so, what has happened with TikTok taking center stage and YouTube Shorts becoming more and more prevalent, with Facebook Reels and Instagram Reels and all of that, this short form content has become the way of modern consumption of video, and that breaks this down, right? So the creator intent is very minimal there. Most of the artifacts are unintentional. Like they probably are running behind their dog, which goes from a really dark inside to bright sunlight on the outside instantly, and then your cameras are saturated, your 3A algorithms are not working as well, right? So suddenly you have these artifacts that are coming in that maybe the creator did not intend, but we should be aware that this is not like intentionally created, right? So Shorts is a good example where like some of this creator intent stuff breaks down, but in general we try and keep a lot of creator intent in there.
So do you do the same kind of level of processing on every video, or is there some kind of ranking based on popularity or number of downloads? Do you maybe revisit some videos later on if they turn out to be really popular?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we have some indicators of predicted popularity through all our friends in different parts of the YouTube org, right? With discovery, with the channel, creator channel folks, and even like partner managers, who tell us that like this is something that like the creators care about. This is something that we expect a lot of popularity, because this particular channel from the creator has been having 100,000 plus subscribers visiting every day, and like where and when the creators are expected to perform well, the predicted popularity of the videos in those channels goes high, right? And we do process the videos based on predicted popularity, like most UGC and even WOD content creators like Netflix already do, right? So we process based on predicted popularity. We give sort of like what we call the dinosaur model or the cockatoo model, where if you look at a plot, the head is where most of the processing happens. We generally reprocess those videos and ensure that like we are doing the best quality for the customer that we can, with the available restrictions around like how much bandwidth they have to see this video, what resolution and quality that they're preferring to watch in, and all of that, right? Are they watching it on a mobile device and whatnot? So with those restrictions in mind, we want to create the best quality, and so we end up processing those a little bit more. And I don't mean to say, by processing more, I don't mean to say that we work the video more. It's just that we understand the video better, so that when we transcode it, the parameters that we use to transcode are different than the way we transcode other videos. And that's essentially, it still goes through the same number of steps, so we don't necessarily work on it more, except we provide more CPU to gain more quality on some of these high-end videos, right? Then there is the middle trunk of it, which is essentially the body of the dinosaur or cockatiel, which we generally tend to keep like the best quality in mind, given the restrictions around like how many people are watching, what is the expected watch time, and all of that stuff. And then there is the long tail, which we generally process them with the least amount of CPU. We end up doing quite a few different things there in terms of like what is more beneficial for storing them and providing them to folks that are watching it intermittently. And the tail is really long, right? So a lot of videos have 0 views on YouTube. And we have pretty much every video that's been uploaded since like the beginning of YouTube, right? Sort of like an archival of the world's video, if you may. So every video from ever since the inception of YouTube is available on YouTube to playback. But you can go through them, and some of the less popular ones are like 0 views. And if you think about it, 0 views means the person who uploaded the video also did not watch it, right? So so there's a bunch of videos that are like hardly ever watched, and we have a different set of parameters to process those videos.
Right, and I heard basically because you mentioned that for more viewed videos, you allocate more CPU resources to process that, and then for the long tail that you mentioned is a great. So we would expect that there should be some computation resources to save. So could be using some hardware based, so that they have like a higher throughput and a lower power consumption, and then the higher parallelism at the same time. Is that the case?
Yeah. So we try not to compromise on quality. So compression parameters still focus on quality at that point, like whoever it is serving. But like we tend to focus on like providing it lesser CPU, so it probably takes a little bit longer to process, right? We sometimes what we do is like we probably produce the resolution ladder that is most watched, rather than like the full resolution ladder. We tend to do internal optimizations on like storage, for example, which would essentially ensure that like the videos are constantly available, but like the less popular ones are available not at the closest point to the user, but like in the server somewhere that could be then accessed pretty quickly. So there's a few different optimizations that go on how we treat the large long tail. But what's more interesting and what's become more challenging is the more the head part of it, like the more popular ones, and ensuring that like the quality that we get on that head is maintained high. And going back to the earlier discussions of UGCE, when the upload quality is not so high, and we make sure to keep the creator intent, there is only little we could do with like increasing the quality there. So it is the upper bound of like what we generate on quality is the uploaded videos, right? So uploaded quality, for example, right? And so you have this trade-off of like how do you make sure that the best quality is provided when the upload itself is kind of low in quality, especially on the head, right? What kind of resources can you attribute? Is it a problem that could be solved with resources? Is that a problem that could be addressed through a perceptual metric and reprocess that in a way that the metric is more optimized rather than PSNR being optimized, right? And so those kind of trade-offs happen, and that's essentially become a lot more interesting now with like Shorts becoming more and more, and YouTube TV becoming more and more, which is like the two ends of the quality spectrum, right? YouTube
Yes.
TV, we get content which is like really pristine, really high quality, and Shorts, it's like the other way, which is like the linear part of the quality uploads, basically. So,
I mean, do you think maybe the information you're gathering through metrics, could that be something that could even be fed back to creators, that they upload something and it says, well, thanks for that, that's great, but we think there are these problems with your video. You know, perhaps you'd like to shoot it again, perhaps you'd like to process it again. Is that something that you would consider that you could do?
yeah, that's an excellent question, Thomas. I think the intent is that the intent is to have creators chime in on their videos and figure out if there is a better quality version that they can upload, right? Um, we generally skew away from asking them to reshoot the videos because that could be a very timely thing that happened. That could be something that is like on the go captures that they did that they want to share. Um, um, but sharing some intuitive understanding of quality, which hasn't existed till we introduced UVQ, was the intent. But we didn't want to share, typical PSNR numbers or SSIN numbers with users because that's not completely relevant for them. And now that we have UVQ, now that we have better understanding of both the content as well as the distortions that could happen during processing for them, we would be able to share some of that back to the creator, at least on the large creators with like this head of the dinosaur, which we tend to work with more frequently, and enable some amount of like this feedback-based interactivity between the creator and us. And that's more and more happening with creators who are directly in line with us, like the top end creators like Mr. Beast and others. That is less so with like the still pretty successful, but like not as well known. Especially like the more Shorts creators these days have become quite a bit more successful with their like view counts and subscriptions, but they're not as well known to the community as a typical YouTuber, right? So that sort of a thing, and they don't feed in completely into the creator economy as such, right? So I think there are steps that we take to help them get to like how do you improve your quality like how do you make it better. Typically we end up relying on understanding of their quality, right? So most of these discussions need to be in reference to something, right? So the idea being like if I was a creator and somebody told me, hey, your quality is not good, my first question would be, as opposed to what, right? Or another question would be like, what do you mean quality, right? Like, so is it like the signal quality, like how I'm looking at it and how good it looks? Is it the narrative? Is it the story that I'm putting out? The quality of that video is not good. Is it not as revenue like ad making? Is that what you mean by quality, right? So these are different, like their understanding of quality needs to be on the same page as ours. So we could provide something like, hey, as opposed to like your quality, signal quality, as opposed to some of the more successful creators here, or like some of your own successful videos having this. Either that, or this other notion of like relying on this quality equal to resolution kind of a philosophy, which most video players rely on these days, right? Which is not completely true, but then for novices that don't understand video quality well enough, you could go back and say, hey, I only see 480p or 360p. Do you have a 720p or a 1080p? And so that essentially tells them, oh, they need higher quality, without actually telling them that we need higher quality, right? So there are different ways of doing this, and so that's what we tend to rely on.
Yeah, I think it's great to hear that you're really focused. I mean, YouTube is really focused on the creator intent, and so I have a question because the YouTube is handling such a great scale of videos, and then you do mention again and again that you consider the user experiences, consider the creator justifications, and then try to get the quality to correlate it with a different use cases, different scenarios. Then with such a large scale, how this correlation are being identified and then modelized, finally to become, like you mentioned, a system of different nets and process such content in automatic way.
Yeah, so awesome question. I think that's very, very tricky to explain like easily without a whiteboard. Um, the very high level of it is that um, in general we have like the subjective scoring methodologies, right? So when we want to come up with something that is largely scalable, you need an objective metric. And the objective metric is only so much useful if it doesn't correlate with your perceptual subjective scores, right? Um, and to create the subjective scores, what has traditionally worked has not worked. So we have new ways of creating subjective scores. We have done those. We have done golden eye methods. We have done like methods where we take understanding from both professional video viewers, like or professional video creators, for example, and as well as like novices who don't understand the quality but also don't really care about quality that much, right? So we've done those analysis, and then we've done in-lab testings, we've done creator-focused testings, we've done surveys, and we've done crowdsourced testings, right? And we've correlated them with not just us, right? We've worked with Professor Bowick, we've worked with Professor Lekele, you know, um, Professor Ortega, Professor, like a bunch of people in the academia as well, not just the
Exactly.
industry, to ensure that some of these understandings are rooted correctly in that subjective sense. And then once we have that, once we have the ground truth data, once we have the data set that goes with it, we launched ourselves in 2019 a UGC data set that's been pretty widely used. Yeah. Uh, and that we have added ground truth data to that the following year, and we've added also labels now for any sort of like metrics that are using the deep nets in the more recent years that Thomas's question alluded to earlier. Um, so it now has features, labels for these features. It now has ground truth data from subjective experiments and these cross correlations. And it also has the data set itself, which is like unprocessed raw YouTube videos, right? What we got uploaded, not what we processed, right? And so that data set has been pretty useful for a lot of folks. And like others are taking that as an example and doing more and more UGC data sets as much as they can at both smaller scales and also larger scales right now. There with that data set creation and with that like ground truth data, we got like a good enough understanding and insights into how viewers like to enjoy UGC content and how different that is from professional content. Now, having that understanding, like you said, having creators understanding as well, correlating that, and then finding something that is metric driven, right? Because this can't scale with the scale of our operations. Having that with metric driven, we tried and tried and tried some more, and came up with multiple iterations later came up with the UVQ models, which essentially started showing us some really good results. And with some amount of like the proper training with those models and proper training of the three independent nets that it is in there, um, we got some really good results. And at that time, when we actually did the stress tests on some of these, for every category of video content that we tested, for every category of and the large variety of like compression parameters that we tested, um, inside each category of content, like film or animation or gaming or
Yes,
cartoons or
different
whatnot.
variants.
Within each content, UVQ was giving better than any other metric in that category, right? Like, so at least as good as the best metric in that category, and in a lot of cases better than that metric, right? So, um, and each category had a different metric, surprisingly. Although there was some commonality, and we found that VMAF was like a pretty good, top level metric in a bunch of these. It was at least doing as good as VMAF at the time that we tested, and now we're seeing that like that could be further improved on, and we are seeing like much more correlations to subjective scores. So to give you a rough idea, before UVQ, most of the existing metrics were about zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8 correlations, and with UGC they fell down to like 0.55s and 0.6s, right?
Wow.
Even with like PSNR is in the 0.49 category, right? SSIM VMAF is also didn't work so well, but like VMAF was one of the better ones. Nike was doing well. TLVM was doing well. Repeak, which we worked with Professor Bovik's team, Repeak was started to perform well, right? But getting good correlations out of it is extremely difficult. And so with UGC, if you consider the average across all categories, I mean, independent of like how some of the categories are a lot more used than other categories, right? Like, so gaming, we see a lot more uploads than other categories, for example. So independent of k-means distribution, if you take uniform distribution and take the average across these, we found that like the correlations with UVQ have been in the higher 0.7s and lower 0.8 range, which has been the best that we could. And some of the improvements that we are planning to roll out further are going to improve that further higher, right, as we do these. So, and again, some of these numbers are like already pre-pandemic at this point, but like there's a lot more going on. Folks have now taken UGC data sets, primarily trained models, and now coming up with like some good metrics, and thankfully so. We need those. We all need those metrics, like including like ourselves, Facebook, Twitter, all the people who play in the UGC world, but also all the people who play in the non-UGC world, because like I was talking to folks at Netflix, and they're saying they're seeing a lot more Free Willy cameras, user like mobile phone captured content in their documentaries increase a lot more these days, right? So pretty much, I think that the whole industry will benefit from some of these metrics. And once we get those correlations, we actively try and apply the objective metrics at scale. I do have to clarify, though, I think Thomas brought this up earlier, there is the algorithmic development and treatment of UGC, and the algorithmic improvements to video and audio. There is the scale part of it, which is a sibling team that does that, which is a video processing platforms team, which is responsible for ensuring that these transcoder operations are performed well, as in relation to like memory and CPU, and like which part of it goes to hardware encodes, which part of it goes to software, and all of that. So that's really like handled by the scale of it. The massive processing of it is handled by a sister team, still within the same video infrastructure, but we are in charge of like the development of algorithms and ensuring that like we get the more optimal performance for UGC.
Yeah, well, thanks for the sharing. Because I have to mention one thing, that the YouTube UGC database, the data set, is really beneficial to the community. And actually, because it has been like, right, it's open source, and then they're already classified and has labels in terms of metrics. And then I believe not only us, a lot of people really benefit from that, both in industry and academia.
Yeah.
So that's really great, appreciated.
Yeah,
So I wanted to ask you a question. Sorry, carry on.
Just a closing thought on that. UVQ now is open source, Zoe, so everybody can try it out. We have like all the models that we are trained on, and all of that be presented as well. So you have the UVQ um, to try it out completely. Like anybody can try it out right now and use it on specifically user-generated content. Um, and we want to do the you know the the right way for UGC, even in the compression field. So we have proposals with AOM and others to incorporate some amount of UGC content as they're building newer and better compression algorithms in the next stages of codec life cycles, that they incorporate some amount of UGC in their at least test models, so that they don't completely focus on one aspect of the video. Because really, in the last decade or so, I think we've seen
Yeah,
user-generated content grow, right? So
it's booming.
yeah,
Mm.
I may have one before, like time goes fast, but then I'll let Thomas before. But I have one question, because you do mention that YouTube Short is quite being handled a little differently. At least the creator intent is handled differently. So I just wonder for YouTube Short, because that's a new genre. I believe this is the most, at least for the recent years. You do mention not only the metrics, but also you have three nets for the like conventional YouTube videos. So you mentioned there's a content net and a distortion net followed by the compression net. I just wonder, like what specialty you adopted when handling the YouTube Short. And I know time goes fast, but this is very new things, not
right.
relatively new, but YouTube actually is getting. I think you have the data getting popular.
Yes, yeah, quite a bit actually. And you can see the numbers are there on YouTube pages. YouTube for everybody to access. I think the more interesting point here is that the shots is not just um, something that is different in terms of how we process, but it's also different in terms of how the creators and viewers look at it, right? Creators, the way
Mhm.
they engage with it, and viewers, the way they view it. It's one of those completely mobile first platforms, right? Which is
Yeah.
essentially vertical video is the way to go, from
Yes.
both creation and consumption, which is slightly different than traditional horizontal video. Your 16 by 9 videos, your 3 by 4 videos, they have had a particular set of notions. You have the rule of thirds when you're generating the video, the traditional video. People have certain norms on creating the best positions for a if two people are talking and you're recording that, there is a way for how to best approach the most viewability of that, right? And those norms break down in vertical video, uh, especially when you're converting a horizontal video to a vertical video. That gets even more trickier. But if you were to approach two people talking and having a conversation, the idea is that you can't have both of them in the same lot, so you have one on top and one on bottom, right? So that is becoming a little bit more common with the vertical video sort of a thing. And also, when it comes to subjective understanding of the video, the positions and the places that a person's eye looks at is different from your horizontal TV style viewing versus your vertical mobile phone style viewing, right? So where people focus on, where they concentrate on, that's the areas that need to be uh, you know the right quality in terms of how you measure it and how you understand that quality, right? And so as we are looking at these videos that are purely vertical generated and vertical consumed, the way we process them becomes slightly different. Your traditional
Mhm.
um, optimizations within the parameters for the codec are different, because they're processed accordingly to the to where you have these what are those called, the monitors, right? The quantization monitors in triangles and whatnot, right? So those things are slightly different. Um, the other way this is different is for creators. Now it's not just the creator intent changes slightly. It's not just about the signal quality, but it's more feature quality, right? So a lot of times two things are happening very, very heavily. One is
Mm.
text and emojis and overlays have become so much more than traditional video. Like my reactions could be like, an exploding fireball or something like that. My reactions could be a smiley face or a crab, right? My reaction to a particular shot, like the shot itself, when you look at a video, has a lot of like overlays on top of it, including text, right? Um, and so now it's becoming more of a problem of like, how do you have the ability to treat individual layers differently? And if not, if all of those mix together when the users upload it, when the creators upload it, then do we have a way to better compress those? Because now you suddenly have, your screenshot style videos. Like, if you had a laptop and you did screen scraping a lot, like, your desktop, where there was a combination of like pictures as well as text quite a bit, and so your high frequency data increases substantially within these overlays, with these overlays. Um, and then the second problem here is that a lot of it is also become reactionary, right? So there is usually, if you consider a 1 minute shot, for example, there's usually a 30-second YouTube clip that is being played in the back, and a person sitting in front reacts to that video, exclaims and pauses or like talks over it, and or says yeah, and then like, there's other things happening there, right? So that reaction becomes more relevant now. And so uh, where we have these combinations, then how do you mix them well? How do you enable like the right kind of transitions are happening correctly? All of this becomes relevant. And so compressing those, understanding the quality of those and compressing those has become slightly different from even regular UGC. And so creator intent is still, like the high quality creator intent is still kept, where like you do want to create like good text in those shots. You do want to create like nice looking overlays and effects for these kind of shots. But at the same time, you need to keep like, the quality of the traditional content really high too. And so that's where these differences come in. Predominantly processing vertical videos, predominantly processing like how do you enable quality understandings with all of these additional components that are not purely video signal, right? So
Yeah, a great uniqueness down there with this
yes.
vertical UPCs and mainly consumed by mobile phones. I think, Thomas, you have something, because I know times went by, but
hmm
actually I noticed that it's really, we got a lot of content. I still actually have a couple of questions I want to address if your time allows. Uh,
Yeah, I can go for another 15-20 minutes. Yeah.
oh, okay, great.
Okay.
Because I was thinking that because usually our episode is long, like somewhere between 30 and to 40. We actually can split it into two. We got
Oh no, please edit at will. So I'm
okay.
perfectly fine if you cut this down to like 10 minutes. That's fine.
No worries. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah. So I was thinking. Well, I wanted to ask you. You've got all these sophisticated metrics that correlate increasingly well with subjective quality as judged. By your expert panels, by your crowdsourcing, and whatever. Do you, how do you close the loop? I mean, do you see that when you apply these algorithms that they actually drive greater engagement with the video and viewer numbers go up or pleasure goes up in those videos? How do you measure the whole package together?
Yeah, that's wonderful, and that's stepping into a territory that I can't unfortunately talk much about, which is internal metrics on how we measure certain things. User engagement, as pretty much everybody can know or already do know, because of I think it's been public for a while, has had different ways of doing this, right? Including using our own platform to serve surveys and stuff. So when you watch YouTube once in a while, instead of an ad, you get a survey on how good the quality of the videos have been, right? So we have been doing some amount of that, and that we see those numbers going up, right, with the quality, and the satisfaction levels go up. We've seen in general engaged users, and like the way we look at like how much people are viewing contents that are higher quality or improved quality from our situations go up. We've also actively talked to the creators who are engaging with these, and the creator happiness or like dissatisfaction has gone down, right? So the creator happiness has gone up, and like the number of like problems slash complaints with like, hey, could you do this slight change, or could you improve like the 1 minute here in between that it doesn't look so good. Those sort of things have gone away, right? And so it's not just on the higher end of like things being better and increasing. It's also on the lower end where like we are fixing a lot of issues that might happen, that could or usually ended up happening before some of these correlations and some of these like good quality metrics were put in place. Now, the tricky part is if you want this really done correctly, you want that metric to be pervasive basically, uh, across the board. You want it in our pipelines, which I think it's all in there. You want it in the compression engine as well. You want the RD optimizations to be using perceptual-oriented metrics rather than pixel-oriented metrics. You want some of the feed within the within the user's view, like recommendations, all of that being correctly identified with this metric, right? So that sort of a thing has to happen completely, and we're trying to get there. I think with the combination of like us, Facebook, and a few other companies in that AOM consortium, we're trying to incorporate some amount of perceptual-based metrics there. We're trying to make sure that like the compression engine not just looks at pixel to pixel changes, although rightfully so it has done correctly for so long, right? Because you have a good video to start with, you want to get to that good quality as much as you can. But we have been trying to incorporate this idea into the codec world as to not always is your reference good quality, and so how do you do a good compression? How do you save your bits when you're trying to recreate artifacts is something that is very tricky to do. And so far the question has been, if we propose that we do this, do we have a good metric that we can stand by? And until UVQ came along, that's been more of the concern. And now that we have UVQ, I think this is something that we could get more into, is to have drive some of the compression RD optimizations using the perceptual metrics, right?
Yeah, so we really want to respect your time, but I just because we have been mainly talk about videos, and then there's also audio part, and
Yes.
so just wonder with such a large scale of YouTube, and then with a different regular YouTube videos plus the YouTube short, and then what kind of I would say overall challenges then and or main tasks you have accomplished on the audio part.
Yeah, audio is also like pretty big challenge. I think the challenges with audio are slightly different than the challenges with video. Um, the challenge, one of the things that is different is like the quality is more closely tied to bitrate in audio. So most people think of like 256 kbps audio as a particular quality as opposed to 128 kbps. Um, Now with UGC, we have done enough tests with VBR, the variable bitrate versions, to find out that audio-wise we can create the same perceptual quality with 220 kbps, for example, than a 256 kbps one. But when you provide 220 kbps to somebody, they think internally it's lesser quality than 256 kbps, right? So it is very difficult to break that assumption, and it's so much more closely tied. And most of the quality numbers are dictated by bit rates in audio. And so the challenges are not to generate those audios. The challenges have been more to do with how do you deal with formats, how do you deal with format conversions. And
Yeah.
so spatial audio is getting bigger and bigger, right? Unfortunately, some of the open source initiatives that have been successful on the video front have not been as successful on the audio front, and we do rely on some of the proprietary methods there. And audio is a lot more proprietary, especially if you think of like um, Atmos solutions from Dolby or something like that, or even Fraunhofer's great suite of solutions. Most of these are proprietary, and most of these are like intended for a particular set of use cases. And so, getting UGC in there and ensuring that it works well with UGC is a little bit more trickier in audio. The format conversions also, I mean, we do a pretty good job at the, up until the 5.1, right, to stereo and mono conversions. The spatial audio, we do a decent job with third order ambisonics with the open source side of things. But it is like, fortunately or unfortunately, one of those things which we end up relying pretty heavily on closed form solutions if we really want to go to the Atmos route, and how does it fit well with that. There are components within the YouTube space that we cater to the Atmos, especially the high-end creators, like most movie studios, for example. They do use what we call premium partner content or high-value content, HVC. Most of these a lot of these premium partners that we work with, especially Hollywood studios, we end up working with like all formats. We don't have any sort of restriction towards open versus non-open. But having said that, audio has been tricky in terms of quality evaluations. Like, we don't have like a really good perceptual quality metric for UGC. There are like the peak and PEVQ and Visqual, which do a pretty good job with perceptual audio in general, but that's for well curated videos. And when it comes to UGC, again, sort of similar problems happen with the audio as well. Clipping, saturation, when there is a loud noise, when the camera, as the camera is recording, when somebody hits the camera, the noise is pretty jarring, that like it's very difficult to get the right quality on that. We do have like a good set of algorithms that we try and include in there, especially like things like dynamic range compression, things like ensuring that like audio loudness is equalized across like the videos or the playlist that you have in your videos. But until we have somewhat similar to UVQ on the audio side, until we have a better quality understanding there, I think it's difficult to transition a really good experience to something that is more metric driven, because perceived experience is substantially different in the audio space. And I think there's been studies like early 70s or mid 70s in Hollywood which showed that audio is at least 50% of the experience. Like a good example there was if I had good quality audio and a really bad quality blurry video in the background, I'd probably still see and understand what's going on. If I had a very good quality video and audio is choppy or not there, then that's a much substantially lower experience for me while watching that video. And so that is critical, right? And that plays a pretty big role, if not the same that the Hollywood folks found in 70s. If it's not the same percentage, it's a little bit higher with UGC, I would say, and audio becomes pretty critical. And there is a short side of audio, which is essentially you do pretty heavy mixing as well. One of the biggest challenges there is like on the vertical video and short form content, you have audio and music and others coming in from different labels and artists that you need to mix and match and figure out like what the right content is for the narrative that you want, right, for creators. And so providing that as a mechanism for like folks on shorts creation side is becomes really critical. not that there are still problems, I think, not that there are not problems. Substantially, some of these problems are or could be addressed if you have like better understanding of audio quality. They could be addressed if you have better understanding of remixes done well, um, and like more to come there basically.
Okay, so more to come down there, and then we
Yes.
can put a closure for today's interview. I really
Yes.
appreciate all the times and all the detailed sharings because behind the large video UGC sharing plus the vertical YouTube short, and there's just a lot of technology driving the user experience to happen to the best. And then I think we also learned about the concept, the strong concept of the creator intent. So we really thank you for your time, Balu. And then we also thanks
Thank
for
you so
everyone
much.
to
Right?
pay attention to this episode. Yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Balu. And
Thanks.
thanks for
Thanks
Thank you so
everyone.
much.
Thanks Thomas.
all
Thanks
right.
Ray. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.